Hello, my name is James McCool. I'm the owner of DFS.com, and today we're going to be doing a little bit of a lineup review. I did these all last year, and I don't know why I didn't do one for week one, but we're going to start with week two. I posted my lineups over in the Discord earlier this morning. Talked through a little bit of the macro strategy about one of the lineups, but not necessarily all of the lineups. I think that accountability is important. I think that playing my own plays is important. I think following my own models is important. So everything that you see here is going to be built off of the models over at DFS.com. Obviously, if you have not checked out the site, you absolutely should. I think that I have a really unique way about going through on projections and different research models and everything like that. So if you haven't checked out the site, go check out the site. But I'm not going to shill too much in this video. We're going to knock out a quick review. I had 3 lineups that I played in the main slate. I almost always have 3 lineups. Sometimes it's 5. The vast majority of the time it's 3. This week I was in the power sweep, the 150. I was in the large one and the small one, as well as entering each one of the lineups in the Millie Maker. Is that good process? No, not necessarily. I wouldn't tell people to do that if they were trying to build a bankroll, but it's something that I do because I'm a degen and I just like to have a fucking sweat. So this is going to be a little bit of a review of those lineups. So we're going to start with the worst lineup. We're going to move into the best lineup, and we'll talk through each one. So first things first, here is the first lineup that we're looking at. It is a Jacksonville stack. So ended up going with Trevor Lawrence, Christian Kirk, and Zay Jones, and no bring back. I'll talk about that in a sec. I also went with Saquon Barkley and Leonard Fournette. I had a secondary correlation of Devontae Adams with Marquise Brown. I had Albert O as a one-off tight end, and then I also had the Falcons defense. So Jacksonville projected pretty well over at Paydirt. For the most part, Jacksonville was a cheap stack like Washington that ended up having a really high adjusted pass rate through week one. We knew also based on last year that they were going to be a pass-heavy team. They were one of the most pass-heavy teams in the league last year, and I think that they're happy to utilize that again this year. From what we've seen, they continue to be very pass-heavy. So their prices were obviously just way too low based on what we expect them to be doing throughout the year. I thought that they had a good adjusted pass rate in the red zone as well. Overall, so far this year, they have a 63.27% adjusted pass rate, which is pretty good. It's above their normal pass rate. It is top 10 in the league as well. So having a top 10 pass rate in the league, as well as having Christian Kirk, who had a great target share in week one, ended up doing very, very well again in week two, 78 yards, 6 receptions, 2 receiving touchdowns. The secondary wide receivers are going to be a little bit weird, and if Jacksonville doesn't feel like they need to push the envelope, it seems like they're not going to. Now, granted, you would have hoped that Indianapolis would be a little bit more competitive. But, that being said, the reason why I didn't have a bring back in this lineup was specifically because I thought that Indianapolis would be dog shit. Without Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce, their wide receiver corps is very, very, very likely the worst in the league. They don't even have good tight ends. They don't have anything outside of Jonathan Taylor. They have a good stout defense. They have a really good O-line. They have Jonathan Taylor, and then they just have nothing when it comes to receivers. Their receiver depth is just tragically bad, and Michael Pittman might not even be enough to save them from that. We'll see. Matt Ryan does not have the bravado and the raw arm talent at this point in his career to carry a group of really bad wide receivers. So I didn't think that any of the wide receivers, neither of Ashton Doolin or Paris Campbell, would end up being good enough. I didn't think that Michael Stratton would be somebody who would be super highly involved in their offense. So I didn't think that I needed to bring back here. I've been pretty forward on multiple shows now and in the Discord of saying that I think due to non-parity in the league this year, I think that there's going to be a lot of games that kind of end up with blowouts. I think that there's a really wide gap between the good quarterbacks and the bad quarterbacks, the good coaches, the bad coaches, the good offenses, the bad offenses. So I'm not going to be bringing things back and game stacking in games that I don't think are going to be super competitive. I was right about that in this game. Jacksonville ended up winning 24-0. Indianapolis couldn't move the ball at all. Jacksonville pretty much had their way, but they didn't keep their foot on the gas. They ended up just using James Robinson and kind of like doing ball control tactics, and that kind of sucks, but it is what it is. The other parts of this lineup, I love Saquon Barkley and Leonard Fournette. I only used 3 running backs this week. I most weeks only use 3 running backs. Leonard Fournette, Saquon Barkley were two of them. Cordero Patterson was the third. So having them together, I think, made a lot of sense. I, like the rest of the industry, had Saquon Barkley projected incredibly well. He was really, really good value. Leonard Fournette, I had projected exceptionally well as well. And he got the workload too, right? And Tampa Bay had a slow kind of grind out game, which we thought they were going to have. So having him there makes a lot of sense to me. And then secondary correlation, Marquise Brown and Devontae Adams. I had Devontae Adams in 2 out of my 3 lineups, and Marquise Brown in 1. I had Greg Dortch in the other 2. It's just I liked the concept of that Las Vegas Arizona game, but I didn't necessarily think that I wanted to stack it. When it came down to that game, I thought that there were only a couple pieces that I really wanted exposure to. I wanted exposure to Devontae Adams and Greg Dortch specifically, and then I was fine with Darren Waller and Marquise Brown, but I didn't really want anybody else. So I didn't see really any need to game stack it when I thought that there were other quarterbacks that were either better values than Derek Carr and Kyler Murray, or just better straight up projections than either one of them, and we'll get to those lineups here in a sec. Last thing was a mistake by me, honestly. I built this lineup out, and Albert O just ended up fitting. I like the Denver offense. I thought that they were in a good spot against Houston. I was fine with having him, but I did something that I always tell people not to do, and that is I just played somebody because they fit. I wasn't in love with Albert O. I thought that he was a fine play. I thought Denver offense was in a good spot, but I mostly just played him because it fit. So anybody who has questions about that, I'm an asshole. Like, I shouldn't tell people to do something and then do it myself. Y'all can make fun of me for that if you want. I'll take it. And the Falcons defense, my models had the Falcons as competitive with the Rams. Actually, my models had the Falcons able to beat the Rams in this spot. Obviously, they didn't, but they did have a chance coming down in that last drive. They did end up covering the spread, so at least I had that going for me. But I thought at 2,100, the Falcons defense was perfectly fine. Obviously, ran super hot, got a defensive touchdown out of them. But that's this lineup. It turned out okay. Obviously, a lot of chalk failed me here. Saquon Barkley failed me. Devontae Adams failed me. And Albert O, who was relative chalk at tight end position, 10% owned, ended up failing me. So the second lineup that I had here was a Washington stack. This was the other value stack that I thought was really good to have in most GPPs this week. I played them for a lot of the same reasons that I played Jacksonville. However, I did also have a bring back here. So this Washington stack ended up being Carson Wentz with Terry McLaurin and Logan Thomas. I brought it back with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I had a secondary correlation of Greg Dortch and Devontae Adams, and then I had Cordero Patterson and Leonard Fournette as my running backs. This lineup is really straightforward, right? Like, I didn't do anything sexy. I didn't do anything special here. I just did Carson Wentz, a 3-2, or what is that, a 3-1 with Carson Wentz, Terry McLaurin, and Logan Thomas, bringing back them and Ross St. Brown. That's not anything super special. It's really easy to build. And then I had the secondary correlation of Greg Dortch and Devontae Adams, which worked out really, really well. And then I had Leonard Fournette and Cordero Patterson with Steelers defense. I was high on Cordero Patterson. His workload mimicked a lot of what he had in the middle of last season, where he was good for 15 and 20 fantasy points most weeks. Like I said, I thought that Atlanta could be competitive against the Rams, and they did end up being competitive for sure, but just didn't end up getting the usage that I needed from him. Only 41 rushing yards, no receptions at all. I forgot to close up this one, but here's the close-up in case you guys needed to actually read it. And then Greg Dortch and Devontae Adams. Again, I was fine with having Greg Dortch. I did say in the Discord that I thought that he was bad chalk, but it's okay to have bad chalk in a lineup. And like, I kind of want to like push that forward. So if you look at this lineup, like, you can see that I ate a lot of chalk. Like, I had Greg Dortch 34% owned. I had Amon-Ra St. Brown 25% owned. I had Devontae Adams at 41% owned, right? But this lineup didn't need me to avoid those pieces. In fact, like, if I could, I could have gone from the Steelers down to the Falcons and gone from Leonard Fournette to Saquon Barkley and still been fine, right? Like, I could have eaten 4 players that were all above 25% owned. I would have had no problems with that. The reason for that is that I had a 5% on Cordero Patterson. I had a 7% on Logan Thomas, and if I would have had the Falcons defense, I would have had a 1% on defense. Like, those things cancel out any of the high ownership that I would have had in this lineup. So because of the contest that I was in, because I was in relatively smaller fields for NFL in the power sweep, I just didn't need the extra volatility by fading all of the chalk. I had Devontae Adams and Greg Dortch projected well. I had Amon-Ra St. Brown projected okay. So I don't mind eating that chalk and taking on the correlations and making my lineup a bit more complete. It didn't work out, but I thought that it was good to do, especially in this lineup. Washington, as I said, projected well in terms of being a really good value. They showed a lot of upside from week 1. I thought that this week should have just been Terry McLaurin week. It almost was 7 receptions for 75 yards, or 4 receptions for 75 yards and 7 rushing yards. If he gets a touchdown, breaks that 100-yard barrier, he was cheap, 6,600. He was a really good piece, I think, in most lineups. I thought that it was a great week to utilize him, especially considering Amon-Ra St. Brown at the same price would be about the same owned. And then you would have, Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. There's a lot in that mid 6K range that was popular, and he was kind of towards the lower end of the ownership. But again, so this lineup has Cordell Patterson and Leonard Fournette, whereas the last one had Saquon Barkley and Leonard Fournette. So the next one that you see, my top lineup, has Cordell Patterson and Saquon Barkley. So that's something that you'll see me employ pretty regularly, is going back and forth and spreading out and diversifying my 3 running backs across my 3 lineups, if I can make it work out that way. I don't force it, but I like to have it that way. This lineup, as you can see, did really, really well. Scored 192.62. We're going to talk about a 2v2 that I could have made that probably would have net me about 20K. But life's hard. This one was Lamar Jackson with Mark Andrews and a comeback of Tyreek Hill. I used secondary correlation of DJ Chark and Curtis Samuel here, and that was brutal with DJ Chark. I had a one-off of Greg Dortch, and then I had Saquon Barkley and Cordell Patterson and the Falcons defense. So this lineup is awesome, right? Lamar Jackson with Mark Andrews, bringing back Tyreek Hill. All those guys did their job. Curtis Samuel did his job. Greg Dortch did his job. No running backs really did well. I could have had Nick Chubb, and I did have Nick Chubb at one point. I came off of him because I didn't need the low ownership in this lineup. I was fine with Saquon Barkley. At one point, this was not Nick Chubb, actually. But we have fucking DJ Chark here. Right, DJ Chark just fisting me here. Ends up with the same amount of air yards as Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think they both had 86 and 87, respectively, 29% of the air yards. DJ Chark drops what is, for sure, a long touchdown on one of his passes. Would have done a lot for me here. But this lineup ends up doing pretty well, placed in the top, top 100. It's pretty good, not too bad. Falcons defense was nice. I have DJ Chark here specifically because I had Amon-Ra St. Brown on the other lineup. So that's something that I'll usually do. You'll see me go back and forth between different pieces of games that I like. I liked the Washington-Detroit game. I wanted to have different pieces of that. That's why I have Curtis Samuel here instead of Terry McLaurin. I liked the Las Vegas and Arizona game. That's why I had Marquise Brown, and I had Greg Dortch, and I had Devontae Adams. All of those different kind of things, right? So I had different pieces of that game. That I'll mix and match pieces of the games that I really, really like. There's a 2v2 here that I could have made, where instead of going with Tyreek Hill and DJ Chark, I go with Jalen Waddle and Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I, for sure take down this GPP. Or at least take top 5, right? It's like a 20K swing at least, upside of a 100K swing. Life is really, really hard, but nailing all of the different spots, all the macro parts, I think was really, really good. I felt that I had a really good read on this slate. Ended up losing a little bit, but that's just because I don't play cash. If I played cash games, I think I would have crushed this slate. But I'm happy to have ended up with lineups that I did. So those were the 3 lineups that I played. Washington stack, Jacksonville stack, and a Baltimore stack. All 3 of them rated very well in the projections over at PayDirt. I had Baltimore as the number 1, or probably number 2 stack. I think I had Las Vegas as number 1 stack. I had Washington and Jacksonville also rounding out the top 5. So, feel pretty good about this week. I think week 3 is going to be really good as well. I have a pretty good grasp that teams are looking. There's a lot of new research sheets that I've been building up for the site as well. So go check those out. Go check out the site. Again, thank you guys for tuning in and watching this and listening to me talk about my lineups. If you have any questions about them, you can hit me up in the Discord over at the site. You can find a link over in the member tools. on the nav bar up top over at paterdfs.com, or you can hit me up on Twitter if you want at pater_DFS. I hope you guys have a great day. I hope you had a great week, and I'm looking forward to the next week. Adios.